Hello, everybody, and thank you for joining us today. We are so glad you're here with us for today's GLR Learning Tuesdays webinar, Scaling High Dosage Tutoring Programs, a Strategy for Learning Loss Recovery. And today's webinar again continues our Learning Loss Recovery Challenge series of GLR Learning Tuesdays webinars, where we are lifting up effective strategies and approaches for mitigating learning loss and supporting children's development. Tutoring is an extremely important pillar in our commitment to slow, stop, and reverse the pandemic precipitated learning loss, knowing that research shows how effective high dosage or high impact tutoring is to achieve gains in students' early literacy skills and in social and emotional skills, thanks to supportive relationships created between young students and then caring adults, or in some cases, near peers. So in our discussion today, we have this excellent opportunity to learn from prominent national tutoring and early literacy programs about their proven impact, about their tutors and how they are trained and recruited, about their work with schools and families, and about how they've been able to expand to multiple geographic regions over the past several years. They will also share their views on what it takes to scale high dosage tutoring programs to ensure that every single student who needs extra support now to recover lost learning and get back on track can access a trained tutor who will be available to spend one-on-one or small group time with them at no cost to their families. And as the new administration sets its priorities and the new Congress begins its work, it is critical for them to consider policies that will support the scaling of high dosage tutoring as a strategy to address the urgent education crisis caused by the pandemic. We look forward to learning from today's speakers about the possibilities for such a policy based on their extensive experience. And before we meet our featured speakers, I have the privilege of introducing our moderator and renowned national service and youth development leader, John Gompertz. John will then introduce our co-presenters and our commentator for today. John Gompertz is a longtime leader in nonprofits and government organizations devoted to civic engagement and to creating greater opportunity for children and youth. From 2012 to 2020, John served as president and CEO of America's Promise Alliance, and prior to that, I got to work with him at the Corporation for National and Community Service when he was director of AmeriCorps in the Obama administration. And before that, he spent time working in the US Senate as well. So I'm going to say welcome to John and turn it over to you.
Thanks so much, Emily. This is terrific, and thanks and welcome to everybody who has been able to join. We're delighted to have a terrific panel today and to have all our guests as well. We look forward to questions and comments. Remember, as you heard, that questions should go in the Q&A box, not in the chat thing, and we'll pull from there and share those questions with our panelists. Emily said it all. I mean, we're in a situation in which we know millions and millions of children have suffered significant learning loss. And we also know that high dosage tutoring is one of the most effective means of dealing with young people who are struggling to get a foothold in learning and a foothold in school. One of the things that Emily didn't mention is that I actually ran one of the programs that is represented in today's panel. I ran Experience Corps, which is a high dosage tutoring program, for several years. So I'm familiar and committed to this work. We were able to help some of the programs that you'll see here today grow when I was the head of AmeriCorps, and as head of America's Promise, we promoted and high dosage tutoring and worked closely with Ralph, Yoli, and the whole team at GLR to press forward. So with that backdrop and with what Emily said as important framing, that here we are at a junction at which we know millions of kids have suffered because of COVID, have suffered learning loss because of COVID. We are hopeful that we're going to come out of this period in the not too distant future. We know that we need to recover, and we have a new administration that we are hopeful will be very attentive to these kinds of challenges and opportunities. So as we approach all of that, we thought it would be wise to pull together some of the most successful of these programs, to hear from them what the secret sauce is, and to understand their delivery systems, and then how they think about scaling. What are the opportunities? What possibilities exist? And also, honestly, what challenges exist? Because we know that, quote unquote, running programs is not easy. And we all dream about scaling them, making them much larger. And we know that practically that is extremely difficult to do. And sometimes you lose the secret sauce when you scale. So we want to hear about all those challenges. But first, we want to get sort of a baseline of what goes on in these programs, what makes them effective, how do the leaders of those programs think about those programs. So let me quickly introduce everybody who's going to talk. And then I'll come back and remind you who they are as we switch from one to the other. Nyla Bolas started work at Jumpstart, I think almost exactly the time that I started America's Promise. We were work pals then and have been ever since. She is the CEO of Jumpstart and has led their effective scaling strategies brilliantly over the last few years. So we look forward to hearing from Nyla. Lindsay Dolce is the Chief Advancement Officer at Minnesota Reading at Serve Minnesota, and which runs the Minnesota Reading Corps, which has grown to many states. One of the most fun and exciting things I got to do when I was head of AmeriCorps was go to a swearing in ceremony with Minnesota Reading Corps, 800 members, the governor, and it was just at the moment when everybody was realizing, oh my God, this is magic in a bottle, and how do we take it other places? That's exactly what Lindsay has done. So we'll hear about that. Michelle Hyman is the Vice President for Program and Partnerships at Raising a Reader, one of the premier programs focusing on early literacy. So she has a background in philanthropy and now in program and partnership. A terrific leader of a terrific program. And then from the program where I used to work, now called AARP Experience Corps, we have Tanya Wiley Robinson. Now, when you look in your chat box, you'll see the bio for one of Tanya's colleagues who has a family emergency today and who couldn't join us. So Tanya is the head of strategic partnerships and community engagement for AARP's Foundation's Experience Corps, and has done a terrific job in that. And finally, we have Adiola Whitney, who we can also call Ola, if that's easier, who's the Chief Executive Officer of Reading Partners, just tremendous high dosage tutoring program that has grown like wildfire over the past few years. And we want to hear all about that. And we have as our commentator, you'll see on screen, Michael Lombardo, who started at Reading Partners and now is working at Book Nook. So Michael will have, he has tremendous expertise and spirit for this work, and he will have a foot in both camps of Book Nook and Reading Partners and sort of reflect on everything that people have said, and that'll bridge us over into the Q&A period. So with that, I think I will stop yammering and I will turn to Nyla, who will present and will have a PowerPoint, a set of slides to go along with it, as will others. Nyla?
Great. Thank you, John. I love being work pals with you. And thanks to the campaign for including Jumpstart in this really, really important conversation. So let me just jump in. Jumpstart now does have a long track record of harnessing the power of caring adults to support young children in reaching their full potential. And what's always been at the center of our program, John, you talked about the special sauce. So for us, the key ingredient in our special sauce is the positive adult-child relationship that really builds a child's sense of belonging and connection. And over the years, our program has scaled significantly, and it's also evolved. And that's really been, I think, in response to both the changing needs of the field of early childhood and also of our community partners. And so now our mission really lifts up what I would say is Jumpstart's core competency of recruiting, training, and supporting those caring adults, as well as our ability to drive systems change. And we do this through 3 strategies, as you can see on the slide here. So first, we support children's language literacy and social emotional development through direct service, high quality programming. Maybe for this webinar, we'll call it tutoring. We don't normally refer to our core members as tutors, but essentially that's what they are with young children. Second area of work for us is around supporting a thriving early childhood education workforce by expanding the pipeline of future teachers and enabling more of our core members to enter the field. And then third is we work to advance equitable early childhood education policies. And all of this from our founding more than 26 years ago is informed by data, both quantitative data and qualitative data that really point to the unique contributions that we can make in this space. And so maybe I will also just talk to the next slide about what have really been the drivers of our scale and lift up a couple of those drivers.
Nina,
Go ahead, John.
You said a little context, just quick, like where you started, when you grew, and what were the opportunities and the drivers of that growth?
Yep, great. So, so the very first year, Jumpstart was founded by 4 college students. 2 were at Yale and 2 were at Harvard. They knew each other from a summer camp, and they came together with this kind of fundamental question of how can we give children the kinds of individualized attention that we give in this summer camp? How can we give children that all year round and literally give them the jumpstart they need to succeed? So they founded Jumpstart at Yale. Originally in that first year, there were 15 college students serving 15 children. It continued to grow and then to scale. Boston was sort of the first place that then it geographically grew. And with the support of AmeriCorps, was able to serve in more states. There was sort of a pivot point for us now about 15 years ago, where we realized that with our curriculum, we could actually move from a one-to-one tutoring model to where one college student could work with 2 to 3 children at the same time. And that way we could serve an entire classroom. So rather than just having a small group of college students working with a couple children, young children in a preschool classroom, we were able to then actually serve an entire classroom. And over time, as we have continued to grow to more states, there have been really sort of a number of drivers of that ability to scale, but I would say I would kind of lift up 3. One, first, I would say is partnerships. That, you know, relationships are a key ingredient of our special sauce, but so are partnerships, because we really sit at this unique nexus between higher education and early education. We also have long-standing relationships now with a range of community colleges, public and private universities. And so those higher ed partnerships really enable us to recruit and to support college students in our program. We also have an innovative team delivery model that's in partnership with classroom teachers, and that really helps to lower that adult to child ratio and really increase the individualized interactions. And I think the second driver of scale, I would say, is quality. And by that, I mean that we've really developed a set of strategies that are part of our instructional approach, and they're culturally responsive, they're asset informed, they're playful. We're dealing with young children. They're developmentally appropriate so that we create more powerful learning experiences and outcomes for children. And then the third driver of scale, I would say, is the idea of dual impact and benefit. And so what I mean by that is that not only do we consistently see outcomes for young children, but really importantly, we see outcomes for our core members, our tutors. We hear over and over again from them, from our alumni, that Jumpstart was the best decision they made as an undergrad. Like that's a direct quote. And we, in our year-end surveys, like our numbers are consistently showing 97% of our core members would recommend serving with Jumpstart to their peers. 96% say their Jumpstart experience helped them feel more connected to the community in which they serve. So those, I would just sort of lift up those three drivers. I mean, of course, financial resources. So I'm sure we'll want to come back to talking about that at some point. Yep. But I thought it would be helpful to think about those three drivers.
Can I just ask one last question, being alert to time, trying to keep this tight? COVID obviously changes things for you. I'm curious if you can just briefly talk about the ways that you've adapted over the last 9 months or so.
Right, absolutely. So college students, are at the core of our program, and colleges haven't been happening in person. So starting last spring, we had to really figure out how do we recruit and engage them, and how do we then adapt our programming. So we did a number of things. We had to develop the systems and the guidance to support virtual, two-way, live, and recorded engagements. And all of it, we really center our training. Our college students get 40 hours of training before they even set foot in the classroom or engage directly with children. So we really want to center that training in our instructional practice. We've also significantly increased our engagement with families, which has now become a major component of our service. And if you skip ahead a slide or two, one more. Right, this is just a shot of how our college students have taken our curriculum and then adapted it for this virtual environment. What's really important is that for young children, it's not developmentally appropriate for young children to be in front of a screen for more than a few minutes at a time. So Jumpstart session is traditionally a 2-hour session that happens in a classroom. We've had to kind of take that into bite-sized pieces and really train our college students in how to stay culturally responsive, how to stay engaged, how to enable children to move their bodies, how to keep the joy in all that we do. And the amazing thing about college students is that they are digital natives. And so for them to actually be able to translate this into video, the videos are incredibly creative. I'm always like, astonished. It's slow motion and all these different things that they've been able to make part of our programming. And the very last thing that I would just want to mention, because you said to talk about challenges, I think a significant challenge that we're wrestling with, if you go to the next slide, is around how we assess our impact in this environment. Yeah, sure. Because our data have consistently shown the impact of our program, but that's for a particular model of engagement with children. And it also depends on direct assessment of children, which we can't do in this environment. So we've really shifted to qualitative data that we are getting both from our core members and also from families. And we've been working with some external experts to help us identify trends from that data so that we can tell the story of our impact. And I think what's important for us is that we really look at this as an opportunity to build a different and frankly, perhaps more complete assessment toolbox.
Fantastic. Thanks so much, Nyla. And we'll be back to you with more questions because my mind is popping with questions and comments. Lindsay, I'm going to turn to you and have you tell us a little bit about Minnesota Reading Corps, which, as I said, when I was the head of AmeriCorps, was the gold standard and got just tremendous results in evaluation work. So as Nyla did, will you give us a little tour of Minnesota Reading Corps and growth and challenges, and then we'll continue this conversation.
That sounds great. Thank you so much. So I would be remiss if I failed to mention that we have added math core since that time, or that's a part of our amazing program too. But I also would really be remiss if I didn't say thank you to the Campaign for Grade Level Reading, and specifically to Ralph Smith for his exceptional leadership around this incredibly important work. He's been a champion of ours from the beginning, much like you, John. So we have to say thank you for that. I also, this doesn't happen in a vacuum, so I want to acknowledge many of my colleagues are joining us today from both Serve Minnesota and Reading and Math Inc., which is the entity that implements the Reading Core and the Math Core. So hello to all of them, and thank you to all of them for the amazing things that they do. I think we're all acutely aware that this pandemic has completely disrupted our education system. I mean, it's completely disrupted our lives. I'm working from home, which I never really thought I would do, but here we are. So I think one of the things that I just would like to name and call out is there was an article recently written by Dr. Bob Slavin, someone who we as an organization look to a lot for guidance and insight, a Marshall Plan, if you will. And I know that it's going to be shared in the chat box, the link to this article. But Dr. Slavin mentioned in his commentary that the research he's been doing at Johns Hopkins University studies the evidence on programs of all kinds of students who are at risk, especially in reading and mathematics. What they and other researchers have found is that the most effective strategy for struggling students, especially in elementary schools, is one-to-one or one-to-small group tutoring. Structured tutoring programs can make a large difference in a short amount of time. And I think that's important to know because it really does drive a lot of what we as an organization do. So since 2003, Reading Core and Math Core have been offering students age 3 all the way up through grade 8, one-to-one and small group tutoring using research and evidence-based interventions along with our data-based decision-making with one goal, that all children are proficient and confident readers by the 3rd grade, and all children are proficient and confident mathematicians by the 8th grade with the skills that they need to thrive in school and life. So all of that is to say that we really, that's what drives everything we do. So our recipe for success, if you will, our secret sauce, and we have loved that phrase for a long time, so I'm glad other people are enjoying it too, because I think it really applies, is it's twofold, really. It's about coaching and training and making sure that you have the right coaching and training in place. So in 2014, the Corporation for National and Community Service, now AmeriCorps, chose Reading Core to participate in a randomized control trial. And through that opportunity, we partnered with NORC at the University of Chicago to do this wonderful external evaluation. We, again, in 2016, had the opportunity to do a second evaluation with the U.S. Department of Education supporting us through their Innovative Approaches to Literacy grant. And I mentioned those two things to say that what really helped our growth was having evidence that not only does what we do work in Minnesota, but it worked in multiple states. So our evaluations happened in Minnesota as well as Miami and Milwaukee. Both times, Mark Hernandez and Carrie Markovitz, who are our researchers, said that our secret sauce really was our coaching and training model. So what you see on this slide is how that looks. So we have layers of coaching support that really drive towards that implementation fidelity. So we include an internal coach, which is a person located at the school, and an expert coach that's someone that works for us. And both of those individuals are supporting the tutors who are supporting the students. All of it coming full circle to support students, really. So what you see on this next slide is a transition, if you will. So in this current year, like so many individuals and organizations, just as Nilo is speaking about, we're shifting in terms of what our work looks like and where it's happening. We just realized as the pandemic began that there were opportunities to reach students in different settings than we traditionally had. So while we normally have partnered with schools, not only in Minnesota, but in 12 other states and the District of Columbia, we started partnering with organizations like the Boys and Girls Clubs, the YMCAs, and so on and so forth, where there are learning pods or opportunities to participate in tutoring there. So if you see on the next slide, the partnership with schools is in a variety of different ways. It can be done virtually, it can be done in person, or some hybrid of the same. The way that we started this year as we talked to schools at the beginning of the year was to say, we want to meet you where you are. So depending on what the school might be experiencing, and I could show you a glorious map of what it's done in Minnesota. It's gone through multiple iterations already, and it's only December 1st. We imagine that will continue to happen as the COVID numbers ebb and flow. So we said to schools, we want to be there to support you and to do whatever we can in this new environment. And so that really has driven a lot of what we've been doing this year, including providing additional coaching support to schools who can't necessarily give the same level of internal coaching support they have in the past. Our partnership with organizations places our tutors in the community, and they're doing the same type of tutoring that they would at a school. They're just doing it in a new environment. And then our third partnership is really a unique thing that we just started this year that we're calling Scholar Squad. And there is a website unto itself to explain this work. But this was really driven by our desire to create equitable access to our tutoring support for free. So we added additional tutors who are supporting students in a virtual way this year. We have provided translators who can help individuals in their initial consultation. And how it works is that family indicates interest on our online portal, and then they have a consultation conversation with one of those coaches that I was talking about earlier to determine what their student needs, what sort of support would be most helpful. And then from that point, there is free, high quality, personalized tutoring that happens to support students. And we've already been hearing from some of the families who have been participating in this new initiative how grateful they are. So I think many of us have heard from school partners and from others that a lot of students are just in the morning getting assignments in Google Classroom, and then maybe they don't see a live personal day. So parents are supporting them and sitting side by side to help make sure they're getting through their schoolwork. Our tutors are live and in person over a secure virtual platform. And we have heard again and again from parents things like, my student looks forward to getting online with you at 5 p.m. And I love the personalized questions that you're asking my child about what's going on in their life, because for so many children, there isn't socialization outside of the home right now. So even though it's through a virtual platform, it does allow them an opportunity to do some socialization.
It's fabulous, Lindsay. Thanks so much. Just curious, that you guys have done it. I want you to keep it brief because we got to keep moving. But you guys have been very successful in scaling, and this is a great description of the adaptations you've done for this COVID period. Talk for a moment about what you see as the barriers. What are the constraints to going broader? If what we need, as Emily said at the top of the show here, is we need way more of what all of you are doing.
Yeah, I mean, I think all of us would probably have a similar first answer, which is financial resources, right? If there were funding to support scaling, we could do it very quickly. And I think we've demonstrated, if you look at the map of where we're at, even in this year alone, we started in Stockton, California last year with 20 tutors. We now have over 100 tutors supporting the Central Valley in California with plans to expand there even more. We're able to scale because we now have the infrastructure and the backbone in place to do that successfully. I think what really the AmeriCorps resources are there. I think the complementary resources, whether it's through the Federal Department of Education or something like that, whether it's through the Department of Health and Human Services, that is what will help drive our growth in a significant way.
Great. Thanks so much, Lindsay.
Thank you.
I'm going to keep moving. Just as folks are listening, I'm hearing three things from our first two panelists. I'm hearing about evidence, I'm hearing about training, and I'm hearing about a pivot toward more family engagement, particularly with respect to COVID. But as Nyla suggested, that pivot may actually open up new vistas and new opportunities for all kinds of programs. So Michelle from Raising a Reader, take it away.
Thanks, John. And then thank you also to Emily and Sierra from the Campaign for Grade Level Reading, because I know that trying to organize this over a holiday week was probably like herding cats, as I was one of those cats that they were trying to herd. So thank you. And so before I jump into the specifics of raising a reader, I want to provide an example of the research, and it can be found on the next slide, a quote from the American Academy of Pediatrics back from May 2017. And so while many of us on this call know this, and the general public and many new parents and caregivers who have babies and toddlers often still wonder why they should spend time sharing books with their children who are not even able to speak yet. And what this quote from the AAP shows, and there are several other types of studies that show similar findings, is that it's really the shared book reading starting in infancy can boost vocabulary and reading skills years later. But it's not just the quantity of the sharing of books, but it's the quality of the shared book reading experience that is really tied to emergent literacy skills. And so again, this is really the type of research in which raising reader programming is built upon. And so now jumping onto more of exactly what it is that we do, starting at the next slide. Raising a Reader is a national early literacy and family engagement program. And we really focus on helping parents and children develop, practice, and sustain interactive read aloud routines in the home. And helping families with these shared reading outcomes, routines, we are also helping their children foster healthy brain development, healthy relationships, and that intrinsic love of reading. And we do this through, and we've done this for the past 21 years through our classic red book bag model, which is where you see, many of you might have seen these before, is the child drives the process by bringing home this bright red bag from any number of potential settings. So we are in family childcare homes, kindergarten classrooms, home visits, and things like that. And what they do is they bring home this bright red bag on a weekly basis that's filled with high quality, award-winning books, so that by the end of a school year, a family may have been exposed to over 100 different high quality books that they share together. And we also provide training to both the implementer, so that family childcare provider, or that home visitor, or that preschool teacher, as well as to the parents on early brain development and shared reading strategies and more. And lastly, we connect families to their local library to sustain that shared book reading beyond the time of using that Raising a Reader book bag. So in this past year, we've actually developed several program innovations that include a digital book bag model, as well as a program that offers both a virtual component, as well as books and resources for families that they get to keep in the home. So while we are not a tutoring program in the traditional sense of the word, when you look up the etymology of the word tutor, which I did on this website called Etymology Geek, which I am not one, so I apologize for any of you that are etymology geeks, so I'm oversimplifying. But you'll find the original sense of the word comes from the Latin tuere, which means to watch over, guard, or protect. And as a parent myself, I know what I fiercely try to do is watch over, guard, and protect my kids. So in this sense, parents are their child's first tutor, and at Raising a Reader, we provide parents the tools and resources that they need to engage in high quality shared reading activities with their children as part of their daily routine. And so again, the next slide, Raising a Reader is a proven family engagement and early literacy strategy. And what I just want to highlight here is that we're aligned to standards for pre-K through third grade alignment. So we are aligned to Head Start, Early Head Start, as well as the Common Core. And the next slide shows our trusted network of affiliate agencies. So we work with over 300 affiliate agencies across the country. And I mentioned earlier that the child drives the process, and they do this through a number of potential settings. And what this slide shows is really some examples which you might expect, like schools and libraries, but there are other settings that you might not expect, such as home visiting programs, food banks, housing agencies, and migrant programs. And just to wrap up on who we are, I'll end with some numbers on the next slide. And as I mentioned, we work with about 300 affiliate agencies who have about 3,000 sites across the country in about 35 states. We serve about 130,000 children annually. And since our time, we've served over 1.5 million children across the years. And we also have 39 independent evaluations that have showed our various family engagement outcomes. And I'm not going to go through all of those for you, but there is a link in the chat that includes information on those evaluations.
Michelle, let me ask you one question before we wrap up this section. So here we are talking about learning loss caused by the disconnection and disruption that COVID has brought to all of our lives, but especially to the lives of young people who are growing up in already complicated situations. I'm curious how that's showing up for Raising a Reader, and then how Raising a Reader can be helpful in responding, especially helpful in responding to that challenge.
Sure, thanks, John. And so to start with that, you can go to the next slide. To start with that, I'll start with a story where I was having a conversation with a Stanford University pediatrician the other day. And one of the things that she mentioned that really worries her, other than the pandemic itself, about the pandemic is really our children ages 2 to 5, and especially with families who have more than one young child. And if you think about it, if a parent is working in the home and trying to take care of their children at the same time, the infant is really going to need to have all the attention. And then school age children, especially if young children, need to have a lot of attention because they need to have the support and sitting still in front of the camera and also getting the links on. And so who's really getting kind of neglected is those children 2 to 5 in the home. Mm-hmm. So we really think at Raising a Reader that this concept, that age group is really important to us, and that's where we think Raising a Reader has a unique role to play. So in the interest of time, I'm not going to go through all of these bullets that we have here, but I'm going to highlight just a couple. So as many of you know, that many children who would typically be enrolled in preschool and kindergarten this year are simply not there right now. So we suspect, where are they? That they're in family childcare homes and with family, friends, and neighbors. So through our over 300 affiliates that we have direct connection to over 3,000 implementers, many of which who are family childcare providers and family, friend, and neighbor care providers, our model offers training to these providers on early brain development, shared reading, and adult learning methodologies. So how might Raising a Reader be able to continue to build the capacity of more providers to support these children who may be very well already a year or more behind before they enter kindergarten? We also have communities where we're in a number of communities where we're in different early childhood settings, as well as kindergarten and second grade classrooms. So how might Raising a Reader be a tool that is intentionally used to promote the alignment between early childhood and early elementary systems via joint professional development or family engagement, especially as we think about important focus areas that Raising a Reader has the potential and plans to incorporate into our model, such as early math and race and equity. My last point here that I'll make is just that our model allows us to work in tandem with several other types of models that are also focused on learning loss and early literacy, such as all of the organizations that are here today. And so what we've done is we've been able to really build the relationships with parents, prime parents in the sense of daily routine with their children. And so how might we provide a warm handoff to other models, such as Reading Partners or Jumpstart or Reading Course Scholar Squad, just as an example.
Thanks so much, Michelle. That's great. And stand by for questions. I want to encourage people to continue to post questions in the Q&A, and I know that some of those questions are even getting answered in real time. So some we will discuss, but some are going to get answered in real time by the people to whom you're posing those questions. And now we're going to turn to Tanya, who's going to talk about the greatest program in the history of humankind, Experience Corps.
No pressure, and thank you so much, John. I'm absolutely delighted to be here today with the campaign on Learning Tuesday this afternoon. So let me get started to tell you a little bit about Experience Corps. AARP's foundation's focus is a future without senior poverty, which is evident by our vision and mission statements. So this is where Experience Corps fits within the foundation. We believe that the process of poverty is a cycle that can be interrupted such that ending poverty starts in schools. We know from research that if students are reading proficiently by 3rd grade, they're far more likely to have better outcomes. And at the same time, older adults who work with Experience Corps have lots of benefits too. So as you can see by our mission statement that we engage highly trained 50 years or better volunteers to help children attain literacy proficiency so that the children succeed and the older adults thrive. So that said, our secret sauce is bringing the best of intergenerational tutoring and mentoring to be able to drive outcomes for both children and adults. So where are we across the country? If we look at our Experience Corps network, we're in 22 communities across the country. And our network consists mostly of affiliates, which are 501c3s or municipalities that have an affiliate agreement with Experience Corps. We also have branches that are owned and operated by the foundation, which means we actually run programs and have firsthand knowledge of what it takes to do it well. Currently, we serve more than 20,000 students K through 3 with 2,300 volunteers that are highly trained, and in roughly over nearly 300 schools and after-school sites. On average, our tutors probably provide volunteer hours, about 170 volunteer hours per school year, which is a significant commitment, allowing our students to have the continuity that they need to make the gains that we know that they can make. When we think about our key components for successful implementation on this next slide, it really falls into several categories. And first and foremost are our tutors. They are the heart and the soul of our program. They work day in and day out to make sure our kids get the literacy skills needed to be successful. And the mentoring relationship provided by our tutors undergirds everything that we do. So that's to say that when kids are able to feel safe within a learning environment, they're able to thrive. But our older adults also are seeing some outcomes that are beneficial to them, including their physical health, their mental health, and social connections. And we've heard others talk about that early on in this presentation. Our students, when we think about our students, partnerships with the schools, the teachers and counselors help us to ensure that we identify the right level for our students to begin tutoring. And we provide support for our students on our tutors on how to really develop relationships early on. And I think now that we've moved virtually, it's even more important to build those relationships as we're using virtual platforms. And so for us, the most important thing for us is consistent delivery of the curriculum within the virtual space.
So Tanya, can you the question is almost too obvious to ask, but if we're talking about young kids who may almost by definition have connectivity and technology challenges, and older adults, me included, who are sometimes not as awesome at technology as others are, talk about how in this COVID moment, you've been able to adapt, what challenges, but I'm guessing there are also some pretty cool, interesting surprises and learnings that you've garnered.
Sure, absolutely, absolutely.
Talk a little bit about that.
Yeah, so definitely. So one of the things I did want to share is we recognized early on when we closed our programs in March that we had this base of volunteers who now are going to be isolated. And we know AARP focuses on social connections and the importance of social connections. We continued at the national level and also at the local level, hosting a series of seminars and workshops for our volunteers just to keep them connected. Even though we weren't tutoring, they didn't have the opportunity to bring closure. We also, at the local level, shout out to all of our programs, have these local coffees, social hours, book clubs so that they could practice and get used to the virtual platform. And so we've been doing that for the last 6 to 8 months. And so when it comes time to actually tutor, they at least have a comfort level with the platform itself. Mm-hmm. As it relates to the students, we know that they're kind of wiggly and they're also trying to get adjusted to it. I think what we do is we really just kind of rely on the support of our program staff and the schools, and if we're in after school settings, to kind of work with the family and help support the students. But it really is what we've been saying to ourselves is we have to give ourselves grace. We know that technology is not always going to work, and we know that it's going to take time. So it's kind of taking some baby steps slowly but surely. You also asked, like, what are some of the surprises and challenges that we've had? I will say that the challenges that we've seen is navigating school district requirements around video interface with students. Some districts are using multiple platforms, and so we have to be flexible with that. And then also having individualized tech support for volunteers per video platform. We're using Google Meets, Teams, and Zoom based on, in most cases, what the schools are requiring. What are some of the surprises that we've had? We honestly, the challenges and the changes just keep coming. As others have described, but more importantly, that the program staff are more creative in mitigating the challenges and navigating the changes. And I think these innovations that we're experiencing with moving to the virtual model may position us to reach many more kids post-pandemic. It will position us to engage many more volunteers who typically would not be able to tutor in person for other reasons, whether it's transportation or it's they were already social distancing because of health issues. There's an opportunity for us to really go to scale, though we're going to actually require a little bit more robust proof of concept before we go there. So we're really taking this first year as a way to look at that.
That's great. That's great. Thanks. Any last thoughts, Tanya, before we turn to Ola?
Sure. If we could move a couple slides ahead, one more slide. So I wanted to talk just a little bit before we move on about our opportunities for scale and growth, where we see that. And I think at a high level, Experience Corps wants to broadcast our story so that more communities can grasp how this can be done. We are looking to, access community resources so that we can have more viable programs locally. And then I'm going to just jump to brand awareness, because I think that's a really important piece for us, that we're seeking to understand the full impact of our volunteers in this new economy. So we understand that they'll be getting digital literacy skills, workforce skills, mentoring and coaching, but we also think that this will be a way to improve and expand our work around academic and student success. So with that, I will just say that we will certainly look forward to the Q&A section to answer more questions. A special thanks and shout out to our amazing network of program staff and volunteers as we continue to take this journey together. Thank you.
Tanya, that was just terrific. Thanks so much. I do want to say, as somebody who's approaching a certain age and looking forward to getting vaccinated, there may also be an opportunity that older adults are likely to be in group 1 and group 2 in terms of vaccinations. So those who might actually have the potential to connect with kids in the spring and through the summer, older adults may actually have a funny competitive advantage at that moment. So maybe there's an opportunity there as well.
That's an interesting thought. I am a tutor with our DC program, and so I am learning this virtual space as we go, and look forward to continue to work with our students. Thanks so much, John.
Awesome. Thanks so much. Ola from Reading Partners, take us home.
I will. Hi, everybody. And thank you so much to all the presenters who've already gone. John, thank you for facilitating this. And of course, thanks to Emily and Sierra from the Campaign for Grade Level Reading. I'm Adeola Whitney, the CEO of Reading Partners, and really excited to share with you all some of what we're doing. We can go to the next slide. And I'll first just talk a little bit about who we are. So Reading Partners is a national nonprofit. We work with schools and communities to empower students through literacy skill building. We specifically work with students in elementary schools who are several months to 2 years behind in reading. And our evidence-based curriculum delivered by our volunteers from the community have been found to have positive and statistically significant impacts on 3 different measures for students: reading proficiency, of their reading proficiency, reading comprehension, fluency, and sight word reading. And then just a quick overview of our traditional model. We partner with schools in the communities that are here on this map, in low-income communities where the majority of the students receive free and reduced lunch. And specifically in those schools, we set up what we call a reading center, where that's where we do the tutoring. That's where we're mobilizing our volunteers and we're training them to provide individualized support to students. And we can move to the next slide. Great. And just to say a couple things here, we do have research-based results. Just to point out one of them, you see MDRC is here, also APA, a respected national education research firm. They found that first through third grade students who are receiving reading partners, particularly many of our English language learners, shows this, significantly greater improvement in their literacy skills in comparison to students who were not served by our program. Also, MDRC has also found that we're making statistically significant impact on second through fifth graders. And then also Child Trends shows that we have an impact on the social and emotional learning for students. And through a lot of the research, and also specifically through the Social Innovation Fund, Reading Partners was able to grow significantly and really become a national organization back in 2011. And if you go to the next slide, I'll just talk a little bit about some of our challenges and the challenges students face because of the COVID slide. Nationwide, as so many of you on this call, on this meeting know, only 32% of students are reading proficiently by the time that they go into fourth grade. And this literacy crisis has really dire consequences for our students and our society. This crisis is amplified in underserved communities and communities of color, and especially during these unprecedented times like the COVID-19 pandemic. According to a June 2020 McKinsey report, they anticipated that most students will lose an average of 7 months of learning, whereas students of color will lose even more learning loss, and students, and also specifically students living in poverty. And if you go to the next slide, the reality is just inarguable, because of the structural opportunity gaps that exist in our country. Online learning exacerbates the chasm between economically disadvantaged students and their more affluent peers. And this is why, as an organization, we have made the pivot. We were, as I said, our traditional models were set up in reading centers in schools across the country. And we had to pivot to what we're calling Reading Partners Beyond.
Talk a little bit more about that, Reading Partners Beyond, and specifically, we've heard, Ola, from others about a pivot toward more family engagement and the opportunities that presents. So I think maybe we want to flip to the next slide and have you talk about that.
Absolutely. I think first and foremost, we know that inequity is only amplified in times of crisis, John. And so much of our model and what we recognize through this pivot is that we strive to be an organization that is doing this work with our community, not to the community, not for the community. And so to do that, it has to be more than us partnering with schools and more than us mobilizing community volunteers, but also really thinking about how we can engage our families. And so one of the second bullet here talks a little bit about our family literacy resources and support. We have a family texting feature, various resources for our families. We're also partnered with an organization called World Reader, where we have a digital library. Also Reading IQ also provides a library for us. In addition to that, we are doing a lot with our tutors. So we've created a tutor advisory council to really engage our tutors and really ensure that we're hearing from them, since they are the ones who are directly working with our students and getting their feedback to make our program even stronger. In addition to this, we have AmeriCorps members. We have over 300 AmeriCorps members across the country, and we're scaling our program to also pivot to have something called distant tutoring coordinators, who are also AmeriCorps members that are working directly with us through this pivot of our Reading Partners Beyond and Reading Partners Connect program. And so I know I'm trying to be mindful of time, John, but maybe I'll pause there and see if there are either any other questions you have for me, or I can also look.
Well, I'm going to put you on the spot, but it's a question for everybody.
Okay.
what you said was about working with communities and with families is so important. And there's a quality of tutoring that can take on sort of a saviorism kind of model, and that could be even amplified and exacerbated when there's physical distance caused by COVID. And I'm curious how you think about this and how you prepare your reading partners to have the right level of humility, to be learning themselves, and to speak to that. I'm curious how others, I mean, people talked about training in this, and I assume that we're not just talking about technical training about how to help a kid to spell out words and sound out words, but training about how to interact. So I'm sorry,
yeah, I mean, I think it goes far beyond, to your point, John, I think it goes far beyond how to tutor for fluency and how to help a child decode. All of those things are important, but so just as equally, if not more important, is also the cultural attunement, right? So if the notion of the nonprofit or the organization doing this work is we have the answer and we are bringing it to you, rather if that's the frame of mind versus the idea that our communities are doing everything that they can to ultimately support students that need the help the most. And we need to educate ourselves on what's already happening and how we can be part of the answer. I mean, I think that's part of the reason why so many organizations, both nonprofit and for-profit, like Book Nook, Raising a Reader, so many of us are all here today because we recognize we can't do this alone. And scaling is part of the answer, but so is understanding what the other organizations, the small ones and some of the larger ones that are represented today, are doing. And I think it's important for us to specifically support our tutors at helping them understand this isn't a savior complex, right? I believe we do just as much for the students as we do to change the hearts and minds of many of the people who are doing the tutoring and directly supporting our students. And I think that's where the real magic happens.
Well, I appreciate that, Ola. I'm gonna wake Nyla back up, and Lindsay too. I know from my experience with Experience Corps, I mean, part of the real magic in Experience Corps is that the people who were doing the work lived in the immediate community and saw kids at the corner store all the time and asked them how things were going, and were completely dialed into the experience that those young people were having, which created a basis for a relationship that then opened up the possibility of learning. Nyla and Lindsay, I'm gonna wrangle you back into this conversation, and then I'm gonna go to Michael in just a second. But I'm curious how you think about this respect for the communities and the people who you're serving, how you prepare in the training to avoid that sort of savior model and all that it speaks to.
Do you want me to go first?
Sure.
Jump in? Yeah, great. Such a great question. And I just so agree with everything that Ola just talked about as well. I mean, for us as well, our college students are, many of them, a significant percentage of them are coming from the communities we serve. More than 65% of our core members now identify as Black, Indigenous, and person of color. About 50% of them are first generation college students. So that's something we're really intentional about. We've also done a lot of work, and actually, especially in COVID, this is something I really want to lift up around asset-informed practice. So that where we really see children's sociocultural context as assets in their learning. So we've actually done some very deep training of staff members. So our staff members who then are going out and training our core members, and we've developed a whole scope and sequence of training around this as well, which has been really important. I mean, we talk a lot about asset-informed language, but asset-informed practice is really thinking about we recognize that children experience trauma, and I think trauma-informed practice has been very beneficial to the field of early childhood. But we are pushing ourselves to think about, if we are so framed in the trauma lens and the trauma story, then we are not responding to and meeting children as the brilliant, creative human beings, little human beings that they are.
Love that, Nyla. Lindsay, a thought from Reading Core on that, and then I'm going to turn to Michael. There's so much for you to comment on, Michael, so I hope you're ready for action in a second.
I was going to say he's got a big job ahead of him. So I would say, again, just building on, I think it's a yes and to what both Ola and Nyla said in terms of, I think we're all learning constantly about how to reach our kids better. In our pre-K work, we have always had a social emotional component that I think has been really, really strong. And I think what we knew and implemented this year was the same sort of piece, or we've added that. The other really important piece I would say is we recruit tutors from the community because we want to build a pipeline of teachers for the community. And we want, it's always a beautiful thing when you're able to find someone who is serving in a school that they attended as a child. I think that's really one of the most beautiful things you can see. I also think it's really important to note that one of the things we're trying to do is increase the living stipend, to also increase, the opportunity for individuals. So it's not all middle-class white folks who are serving in AmeriCorps moving forward. And I think that we're just at the very beginning, at least for our program, of really expanding what we do. But one of the pieces we added this year was training around ACEs. We had done it in Milwaukee, but we added it for our other sites and states. And I think there's more room to grow there. But I think Ola is spot on in terms of the way that she is talking and thinking about it. And we're all moving that direction.
Awesome. Thanks so much. Michael, I'm sorry to make you wait, but I've given you both time to think and lots of grist for the mill.
Yeah, no, thank you, John. This has been a terrific dialogue. And I think part of my role as a commentator here is BookNook as a technology platform works across a variety of different models in different local community providers. Having had my experience from Reading Partners, being CEO there for 10 years, I certainly have a lot of enthusiasm and belief in volunteer-based tutoring. At BookNook, we work really across a spectrum of volunteer, professional, and teacher-administered tutoring. And I hope that some of our experiences can help to inform this discussion. So BookNook fundamentally is an online platform for synchronous reading instruction. That means that unlike most technology tools that teachers have in their toolbox right now, this is something you do live with your students, and that happens in real time. We do both distance learning work and remote instruction, and we specialize in small group instruction for activities like intervention and guided reading, but also work to help teachers support whole classroom instruction. One of the big challenges to scale, and I'm glad that Nyla referenced this, is thinking about instructional ratios and how teachers who in many cases have to manage 20 to 30 students can provide really rigorous and effective instruction in that environment. Technology can absolutely help. And how does it do that? Basically, BookNook is in the cloud, so you can access it with any device. Teachers and students each have a device. Those devices sync up as you log in your class or compose your group for tutoring, so that the adult, which we call a reading guide, can kind of control what's happening on the student's screen, and the students can control what happens on each other's screen a little bit, which they get a kick out of. And then we work together, going through algorithmically recommended content that is standards aligned. So we are identifying the specific reading skill gaps that students have, and addressing them with instruction that ranges from early phonics to late stage comprehension, and providing Spanish language scaffolding across all of our content so that students who speak Spanish primarily at home can receive instruction in Spanish and begin to learn their English reading skills. Everything we do is measured in real time. So when we talk in a minute about what we've seen in the data in COVID, we're able to both adjust to what we're learning about students reading every day that they use the app, and to not spend more time on something they definitely have down, and to focus our energy on the spaces where they have opportunity for growth. And then also, I saw a comment earlier about the way testing fits into the school day. It's been a very controversial subject for a lot of school systems during distance learning. And we are all about what at Book Nook we call passive assessment, which means rather than sitting down and having a test be an event, we can learn a little bit about students every time they use our app and be able to accurately predict their reading level based on that without having to ever actually stop and test them. So that's a real core to what we do. And then some of the things that I think make Book Nook a little different than some of the other folks who have spoken today to touch on. The first is the partnerships model. So we don't put boots on the ground in any of the communities that we serve. We work with 400 partners and affiliates across 34 states. And the reading guides are predominantly their workforce. It means that it's teachers in schools or paraprofessionals, it's community volunteers coming from a college or university who are going into elementary schools to do service, healthcare providers, childcare providers. You know, when we think about scalability, schools are a crucial part of that equation, but the more entities and types of entities we can bring to the table to deliver high dose tutoring, the greater the probability we can reach the kind of scale that the issue demands. And then the second thing that makes us different is we are a for-profit company. We are what's called a social enterprise, which means that our investors are funds that only put money into companies that make commitments to social good. And it's actually written into our corporate foundational documents and our investor documents that we are accountable to our investors, not just for the financial success of our business, but for the impact we have in the community. This is kind of the bleeding edge of the social sector in a lot of ways. And we're trying to really straddle the world of technology, which is tremendously good at reaching millions and millions of students, with the world of the social sector, which is about care and attention and cultural competency, and trying to take the best of those both worlds and be highly scalable while also having a real mission and impact. And then in terms of COVID-19 as a technology provider, you know, we've had a perspective on data that probably you know, is a little more closer to where students have been. So we were able to recover to pre-coronavirus levels of usage on our app by May. We've logged over 100,000 sessions of distance learning since the spring. What we saw in the spring was, you know, the need for a lot of free resources for families, but we tried to be more thoughtful than many of the other ed tech applications that were out there that just sort of use what we call the spray and pray model of just giving lots of apps to families and saying, good luck, figure this out. And instead to really provide a thoughtful training and professional development experience, again, providing materials in English and Spanish and trying to make sure that use was, you know, consistent and meaningful for students. And then this fall, we've seen, you know, sort of a delay in the usual kind of on-ramping of student learning, but right now we're clocking about 10,000 sessions a week, and we have 75,000 students in total on our app. So we've seen a steady climb as teachers have moved beyond the sort of just trying to figure out how to start my school year to really thinking about students' reading needs and beginning to roll out tools that can make a difference. And what we've been able to see in our data, because of the passive assessment capability, which means we're measuring what happens without having to do assessments, is that our spring students, 90% of them showed no COVID slide at all. We were able to at least maintain their grade level between March and July. If you go to the next slide, please, I've got a graph on this. And that was during a time when, as Ola referenced, we were expecting, based on several studies, to see students going backwards significantly. 60% of Book Nook students in the spring actually made gains in their reading and gained an average of 3 months, which is exactly what you'd hope for in the classroom. This fall, we saw our average student come to us about 5 months below their benchmark in reading. And just by the middle of November, we've seen students narrow that gap to about 1.5 months. So we're really seeing that when you have structure, rigor, and evidence-based practice, it can make a difference and it can really drive outcomes for students. So I, because I'm a commentator, I wanted to throw out a couple of the issues that we see consistently across our program partners across 34 states in scaling high-dose tutoring. As John referenced at the very start, this is widely understood to be a highly effective approach. The question is, how do you do it for more kids? The first challenge to really think about, and many other panelists have talked about it, is cost. You know, I did some high-level numbers using the 2019 NAEP data on reading achievement. The headline here is to really address this permanent scale. You're talking about needing to deliver hundreds of millions or even billions of hours of tutoring. And that is the size and scope of what we are up against. My 2021 estimate on this slide, by the way, is a very optimistic guess at what we might see in NAEP after the pandemic. But the need is huge. And there is a universe of private solutions that are out there, from Sylvan Learning Centers and Kumon, that on average charge about $40 an hour. And you know, for perspective in terms of what might be a reasonable federal appropriation to expect for high-dose tutoring, during the No Child Left Behind era, we spent about $3 billion on tutoring through supplemental educational services. And the total national Title I budget, this is money that goes to the highest poverty schools for supplemental services and programs, is about 16 billion. So I think the first moonshot for us to really grapple with, or the challenge I'd issue to all of us, is to really think about how we bring the cost of high dose tutoring down, and think about this both from a resource allocation and advocacy standpoint, and stand together to really get the message out there to policymakers that these strategies work, and get more funding for them. But then we as a sector have to figure out how to bring our costs down. And I think a reasonable number, if you were really talking about billions of hours of tutoring, would be to think about how to get to something like $10 an hour. And that requires us to ask some really hard questions about our model and to think about how we can make that work. And then the second challenge is to think about reach. And I saw Monroe Richardson asked a question in the Q&A about how we think about both the cost of starting these programs and also the operational complexity of delivering them. And that's a huge issue. And we work with partners that range from a single clubhouse boys and girls club in rural Iowa to a scaled school district like Oakland, California. And the executional capability of those two kinds of partners varies wildly. And what we can reasonably expect them to have in place in pre-existing infrastructure to develop programs is something that we really need to be thoughtful about. And the graphic that I put up here too, as we think about just where poverty exists in the United States and where the need for these programs are, is that if you look at the largest 120 school districts in America, they only account for about a quarter of all student enrollment. And the vast majority of students attend school districts with enrollment of under 40,000. And that means you're working again in local communities where the foundation of philanthropy doesn't exist. There are much more limited infrastructure opportunities. And I think really, asking yourselves about how your model can port into each of these environments and how we think about, we've used the special sauce analogy here. I might talk more about, I guess it's getting late where I am, the cocktail approach of, what different kinds of programs need to come together in different types of communities to be able to reach students, and to really leverage the strengths of evidence-proven models to, tailor that to the needs of, a rural community versus an exurban community versus a dense urban core. And I think that's something to grapple with, as well as a lot of our panelists have talked about family communications. I think that is something that we also need to be working on, and both helping families to understand the difference between the sort of fly-by-night SES providers who sound like they're doing something that's meaningful, but in fact are providing fairly low quality instruction. And also just addressing the digital divide issues, which too many school districts believe they have solved when they have not. And those issues are there in the urban core of access to devices and internets, and particularly in rural communities where hotspots don't help you if you don't have a cell tower in your community. So I think really thinking hard together about how we can, work with these different kinds of local providers, be cognizant of their capability and kind of meet them where they are with evidence-based programs that can really scale.
Great, Michael. Thanks so much. So much to think about in there. Cost, reach, and digital access as key things that all of us need to think about. I realize that we're running behind. Very rich conversation. I know that there's lots of activity both in the chat and in the Q&A box, and let's keep that going. But before we open up widely, I want to call on Corinne Apollon, who has experience across a whole bunch of these things, for quick reflections on where we are as we pivot towards questions. Corinne?
Thank you, John. Good afternoon, everybody. It is a real thrill and pleasure to be here and hearing about all the great work that's happening across the organizations. Just to give a little context, before I spent 20 years at Scholastic Education, building scale and working across the country with schools and districts and implementing programs and resources. And certainly over a more recent time, I'm the former CEO of Reading Partners. So it's great to see Ola and Michael and the great work that's been done at Reading Partners. I think for me, I'm going to be quick, but I think my reflections are very simple. It's clearly, given the COVID slide, we have huge work ahead of us and everybody's doing everything that can be done to help. But I do believe that there is a convergence of research and funders that are really focused on high levels of tutoring to mitigate the slide. And so as we think about that, I want to focus on a few aspects of this work. I applaud the organizations and the leaders for what they're talking about and really For me, having built resources for family and community engagement, I think we really have to hone on that, because if we've learned nothing from the COVID slide, is that kids are home with their families and in their communities. And so we need to start to build resources and support so that the reading and the education and the community can support, and family engagement is really important. And I want to really extend kudos to Ola and to Lala as we think about asset-informed practice, and being working in coordination and collaboration with communities is going to be an essential component so that we can continue this work. I also want to touch upon, as I think about how we approach this work around the cost and the scale, thinking about the value proposition and the value for high dosage tutoring, the family engagement, the community engagement. I think, I saw in the chat around the AmeriCorps members, the opportunity for them and serving them and giving them an opportunity for training and becoming educators as well. I think about building the school community partnerships and reducing the cost. I am optimistic because part of the work that I've been doing over the last 6 months is really working with foundations and funders and advising them. And they're really interested in being able to invest in this work. And so it's always going to take public-private partnerships and public-private funding to get the necessary investments to make this work. And so as we think about that, it's going to be important for us to identify who those are and what they look like. Federal government, AmeriCorps funding, school dollars around title funding. I just went to a session from Harvard University Center for Education Policy, where they did an outcomes-based contracting model where school districts need the help. And so they're making investments in resources, but they're making sure that there's accountability and outcomes tied to the payments. So those are things that we need to start thinking about. And as I think about that, it's great to hear, the talk around, from the organizational perspective, around how to reduce the cost per student, making sure that we're not also reducing the effectiveness of the work. And so technology, innovation, small group tutoring, supplemental resources that continue the work beyond that interaction with that tutor or with that curriculum is going to be critically important. So we all agree that this is important to support. It's going to be essential that we all advocate for federal support, state and district support for high dosage tutoring. And with that, I'll turn it over to Q&A.
All right, that's fantastic. Thanks so much, Corinne. That was a really helpful wrap up and good set of challenges. I'm curious, based on the questions that were in the Q&A box, there are questions about the science of reading and how different programs deal with the sort of scientific basis of how young people build reading skills. Who wants to speak to that at the beginning? Lindsay, go ahead.
I was just going to say, I'm happy to jump in there.
Please.
I would just say that, so for Reading Corps, we are firmly in the science of reading camp, and all of what we do really trains our tutors to understand that. We believe that is the basis from which students are able to learn to read. So things like phonemic awareness, word decoding, a lot of those tools are really what drive our scripted interventions, if you will. And I commented to someone that I would be happy to share our evidence base in terms of our interventions if folks would be interested in that. I will say too, the other piece that's interesting is I think many of us probably have encountered schools where whole language has been the historical approach. And I think there's been a shift in the last several years. I feel like there's a lot more shifting happening towards the science of reading approach. But we feel, optimistic about that taking place, and firmly are in the camp of the science of reading is where it's at. So
interesting. Others? Ola, your thoughts?
I don't really have anything different to share. I think, Lindsay, you hit the nail on the head. I think similarly with our curriculum, and I shared a little bit of that at the top of my presentation, that we specifically break down all of the various components of reading. and really focus on helping children build their fluency, build their decoding, so forth and so on. But no, I feel like I'm just taking up airspace to be taking it up. Just that I agree with Lindsay. And that's also our approach in our curriculum.
So to balance that, we know from research and from observation and experience and common sense that what happens in our programs is not a transaction, it's a relationship. So I'm curious about how people think about preparing tutors around the science of relationships, the science of learning and development more broadly. Anybody got any thoughts about that?
I'll just share one really quick fun story that I think is telling in that, and I'm sure Nyla has a lot of these stories too. When you work with the little littles, you get a lot of this. But we had a tutor in training one time who was like, what if a child wants to hug me? What do I do? And we were like, you hug them. They're 3, they need hugs, right? So there's some of that real world, just sort of common sense stuff that they pick up as they go along, but it's more art than science in that regard.
And I would just add, and maybe a way to sort of bring the last 2 questions together also, that, part of what we're training our core members in is to support children in their development of like an interest in and an enjoyment of stories. Like there's so much joy in it. We want to help them, develop initial understanding of vocabulary and content knowledge, so meaning, and begin to comprehend connections between characters' mental states and their behavior. And so it's that social emotional development piece that is really critical. And so when we train our core members in, sort of what is developmentally happening with children when they're 3, 4, and 5 years old, it really supports that social emotional development. So we do a lot of deep dive around that. And a lot of our vocabulary and language development work is actually focused on emotion understanding and mental state vocabulary. So kind of bringing those things together.
Yeah, I definitely wanted to add to that as well. I didn't have a chance to talk about it, but over the years, we have fine-tuned our model to focus on fluency. And so there are a lot of games of repetition that we're playing with. We call them games that we're using around fluency, but then we also, at the very end of our 30-minute session, have a read aloud where our tutors have the opportunity to model fluency. And I think when students see the emotions on their face and the inflections in their voice, all of that, I think that's another way to, again, like Nala said, get them excited about reading. And so I think it goes hand in hand with the social emotional learning.
And I think also as we think about race, equity, diversity, inclusion, READY or DEI work, and no one likes to talk about this, but it's the truth. And Karine, you and I have spoken about this before too, right? Like we have a responsibility to think about what we're doing in terms of helping, whether it is our incredible college volunteers at Jumpstart or our AmeriCorps members or our senior corps volunteers, but anyone, right? Anyone that's jumping into this work with us, we have a responsibility to help educate them on the danger in thinking that our children are not loved or that because I think sometimes there's this excitement, like I want to help on the other side of the train tracks. And I have this great knowledge and I have this wealth and I'm going to come in and make these kids better. And it's like, no. Yes, you're going to come in and help them read. We want that, but they are loved. And so I think in the same way, all of the things that have been shared, yes, I think we want to do all of that. And I think we also want to call out when we see, at times like a dominant culture or a way in which people engage that can be harmful to our students. And I think it's just as important to think about how we train on that.
And then I just want to lift up what has been a thread throughout the whole conversation is that role of the parent and the role of the family. And so much like everyone here that was talking about the training that is needed for the tutors, also having a focus and that partnership with the parents and creating that ongoing home routine as well.
your sound is off.
Yeah, was it just me or was it?
It is. Should we turn off our videos?
Yeah, maybe if everybody turns off their video, we'll get John back. But I'm guessing we probably have time for one more question. John, do you want to try again?
I think he's frozen.
Oh no. Okay. Well, I think that he's trying. I think so we had some questions here about evidence-based approaches. I think you've already touched on that one. But I know there was one question that I think Tanya responded to directly, but I thought since we do have so many national service, AmeriCorps funded programs, I think this was a question from Amber, and I'm trying to find it again, but she was asking about folks coming together around an idea for a federal proposal to scale a high dosage tutoring. I know a lot of you touched on that, but I would just love to hear a couple of quick responses to that before we close out. The question is around coming together around a proposal for federal funding, whether that's, primarily through AmeriCorps or other ways.
So I'll put in a plug for joining Voices for National Service, which a number of us on this call are a part of. It's a collaborative of service organizations that advocates for increased funding for AmeriCorps and more core member positions. And then I would also say, I mentioned that in the response to you, but there are other opportunities too, like I think about for us, federal work study is something that really enables our college students to do this program. There's no way we could run it. We leverage over $7 million in federal work study. And so we work with other higher ed partners to ensure an expansion of the pie. We think about equity and how federal work dollars are allocated, and also that we increase the percentage of federal work study dollars that can support off-campus community service.
Thank you so much, Nyla. So John is frozen, unfortunately, but we actually are right at 4:30. So I want to say thank you to everybody here today. John Gompertz, thank you for your brilliant moderation. Thank you, Nyla. Thank you, Lindsay. Thank you, Ola. Thank you, Michelle. Thank you, Tanya, and thank you, Michael. And of course, thank you, Karine, for your last sort of comments there. Thanks to all of you, and I hope that you will join us again. We've got some really great webinars next week and the week after. So I just posted in the chat the ways to register for those. And again, thanks to everybody so much for this incredible discussion today. And we will be sending a follow-up email with all of the links and the recording and everything. So you should expect that in your inboxes later this week or early next week. Thanks to everybody, and have a great evening. Take care.
Thank you so much. Thank you for having us.
Thanks, Emily.
Thank you. Bye, everybody.
Thank you all. Bye-bye.